How's it going, guys? This is bodybuilding tip number 3. So I've been making a little bit of a small series where I go into some bodybuilding tips, and that is because, in my opinion, bodybuilding has a lot to do with mindset and then application. And in today's video, the tip is you have to work hard. Now, this in itself is not anything new, groundbreaking, or anything of that nature, but I just hope that the way I'm able to explain things, or that the angle that I'm trying to come at with this, is going to be more relevant and more applicable to your own training. Now, with hard work, typically what anyone on this platform says, if they know what they're talking about, is proximity to failure and progression. Both of these things. These are your two best methods to track how hard you are working. Now, an important caveat that I want you to keep in mind is that progression is only possible when you are following the standards you have set for yourself or that which your goals require of you. If you are a competitive powerlifter or anything of that nature, you have to make sure that you are practicing the form that is going to either leverage into a PR on the platform or going to be given three white lights by the judges. And then for bodybuilding, if you start cheating your form just to lift more weight, but your actual goal is building more muscle, then you are breaking the standards that you have set for yourself or your goal requires of you. Now, with that out the way, we can actually talk about the hard work portion. And the most important thing I want to get across here is that, unfortunately, there is no easy way. Stop trying to find it. Stop trying to look for it. Easy usually comes in the form of buy-in more than anything else. It's not easy because it's genuinely easy. It's easy because maybe we enjoy it. Maybe we prefer it. Maybe it just gets us more excited or something of that nature. Typically, that's what easy means. It's not easy in terms of effort. It's just easy in terms of buy-in. So that's the difference there when it comes to easy training. But other than that, there's no such thing as truly a form of training that lacks any type of difficulty that will result in any good results. And if you try to go the easy training route, it will only take you so far. Now, I'm not going to say that easy training is completely useless. Anything you commit yourself to for a long amount of time will result in something. But that being said, you're always going to be limited by the amount of effort you put in. So, now that we have covered that, I also want to point out that hard training is not simply a matter of perceived effort. There are many people who can grit their teeth, make noises in the gym, slam weights around, and will pretend that they're training close to failure or may actually be training close to failure, but because they don't have a structured plan, because they don't have a progression scheme in place, they're not really going anywhere and they're just spinning their wheels as fast as they can. You have to be surpassing your limit in some way, or you must be putting in some work that will reasonably, over a period of time, result in that. And you have to make sure that you are adhering to everything that I mentioned previously in this bodybuilding tips series. So good form and whatnot, right? There are a lot of different ways that people mess up their progression. And it really depends on what style of periodization or style of programming that they themselves buy into. And this in and of itself is also one way that people kind of mess up, and that is they take into consideration things that don't really apply to them in that moment. For example, if someone is training on a more linear split or more linear program, they likely won't need to deload nearly as much as someone who is doing a concurrent or conjugate approach. If you are training more linearly, typically the mistake that you are making is that you are starting way too damn heavy and you're not resetting enough. If you are constantly going back just to 70% and you're just building back up, adding 5 pounds all the time, and you're hitting the same wall over and over again, start back lighter, increase the amount of volume you're doing at those thresholds, and then that is what will leverage you into a better position when you get to the peaking zone of a linear periodization scheme. Now, if you are training in a more concurrent and conjugate program, because you're constantly pushing close to failure, that is incredibly stimulative, and as a result, it is also incredibly fatiguing. Whereas with a linear approach, because volume and intensity share an inverse relationship, at the beginning you are training with the lightest intensities, and then you are with doing the highest volumes. As you go further into the training, you go into lower volumes with higher intensities. That's kind of how fatigue manages itself during that scheme. However, in concurrent, when volume and intensity is high throughout the yearly cycle, something has to give. Fatigue has to be managed in some way to make sure progression still keeps going. And how do you do that? Typically, when I ran a split like that, I would just deload every 4th week. 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Very easy for my schedule, allowed me to work incredibly hard and push a lot of effort into my training. But I was then able to have a week of lower stress training that would allow me to continue making progress regularly. Some of you just want to go hard all the time, never really giving yourself that ability to build up or to recover to the training that you're doing. Sometimes when you are digging yourself into a hole, the best thing to do is stop digging. So the other part I want to mention too, as far as a mistake that I see a lot of people make when it comes to their progression, is quite simply too many moving parts. Something that I've done to really improve my own training has just been to simplify everything else beyond the main lift. For example, on my main lift, that's where most of the programming actually happens. I don't have to do a linear progression on every single exercise that I'm doing, as if the fatigue is a non-factor. If you are pushing really hard on your main movement, it may impact your performance on the other ones. So that's why I like a more auto-regulated approach where I'm using something like double progression or dynamic double progression for some exercises. And simply doing that on my accessories, my supplemental lifts, whereas on my main lift, that's where the most of the progression happens. That has been working incredibly well. Some of you think that you need a hyper periodized approach on every single lift, and as a result you think that the program is not working because on one of your exercises you're not hitting the numbers you think you should be, and as a result you throw everything out. You maybe even take some work and effort away from the main lift because you just want to make sure that the entire program is going forward, and I think that's a shame. I do think that you should prioritize your main lifts, and this is just because I'm more of a power builder, so maybe this is where the bodybuilding rules or the advice may be its weakest in this video. However, the point I'm trying to come across is that when it comes to the accessories, when it comes to your bodybuilding work, effort is going to take care of that. And as long as you auto-regulate it and have a plan in place to know when you should or when you shouldn't add weight or add load or something of that nature, you are going to be doing incredibly well. You don't need to plan out every single thing in there because you might just get burnt out mentally, and I think that's one way that people mess up their progression as well. They try to stick to something too unrealistic and too strict. And the last two things as far as like how people mess up their progression is, first, never training close enough to failure, and also never training far away enough from failure. Usually this comes in the form of two different types of people, right? So the reason why linear periodization works is, like I said, you build a base and then you leverage those adaptations into heavier training in those later weeks. So you have to start light. When people hear sub-max training, oftentimes it makes you think that this person trains like a bitch. And I am people. I thought that way. Whenever I heard like people say that they do sub-max training, I'm just like, oh, you train like a bitch. Because I was the concurrent conjugate guy where it's just like effort, gotta go hard work all the time. And the issue here is that people who have that kind of mindset where they just hear that you have to train harder than last time or you have to train hard all the time, instead of training like a bitch, you train like an asshole where your effort might be super high, but your rep quality is incredibly low. Both of these things are going to mess you up in the long term because hard work is not blind. Hard work is incredibly difficult and disciplined. Can you do the correct things with great effort? Can you follow a plan and commit to that plan with great effort? The plan isn't what causes the results, and neither is effort, because there are many people who have a good plan on paper and aren't going anywhere, and there's many people who by all appearances are working incredibly hard, but they're not making any progress either. It's the union of both that causes you to actually make progress. You can't just completely rely on one thing, and the more mature you become, the more you realize and accept that. Something that I feel is incredibly backwards, and I don't really fully understand it, is the idea that if you can't simplify it, you're not doing it good enough. And something I would raise to them is, if you are pursuing any skill, or trying to advance in any progression or profession, and even something as simple as maybe an education system. In what way does things become more simple the higher up you go? If you are an entry-level worker, your job responsibilities and tasks are extremely minimal. Become a manager. Now you have to do everything that they can do and more. If you are in school, in what way do things become more simple? The more you learn, the harder things actually become conceptually, and when you actually have to apply them, but you become smarter and you're able to handle more things. Same thing applies in any other skill, like let's say a martial art. Look at the guys who are first starting out and the ones who are at the top level. What is the difference between their technique? One not only knows more, but can do more with higher quality. Same thing applies to lifting. And I think it's incredibly weird that us lifters, or at least some in our community, are trying to say that if you can't simplify it to one thing, you are not training in a way that's actually effective, because training should be simple. No, training should be effective. And as long as that is being adhered to, then that is what's going to work long term, because that's the definition of effective. But how do we make sure that happens? Good form, good technique, a plan, progression, proximity to failure, all the things that I have been breaking down with these bodybuilding tips, and I will continue with for the next couple videos. So I hope you are enjoying this series. I hope you're finding it useful. If you are one of those people who think that it needs to be simple, my challenge to you is I want you to be smarter, because I think you can be. I think you have it in you, and you just need to believe in your own faculties to learn more things about yourself and training. So that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is King, StanceTraining.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.